special day. Makes it look so easy. I just want to try it right now. We do have a very special day today. Rabbi Seth Castleman is here with us this morning, as I mentioned earlier, the Exodus Project. And so please welcome Rabbi Seth Castleman.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And what a good morning it is. So yes, I am a Jewish rabbi. I also simultaneously, as it was in rabbinical school, was ordained as a Buddhist dharma teacher. And just to mix things up a little bit, I went on and married a Protestant minister. So usually on Sunday morning I'm in church, but usually they don't call me Rabbi Seth, they call me Mr. Pastor Elizabeth. There's an old adage that you may have heard, that there's one spiritual mountain and many paths up it. It's nice, it's trite, it never quite worked for me. For me, I've always thought that there were more distinctions and uniqueness to each of the different faith communities and traditions that needed to be respected. But at the same time, there was a oneness and a unity. So in my mind, I've always seen it as there's a mountain range. There's a Buddhist mountain, a Christian mountain, a Hindu mountain, a Jewish mountain, a Muslim mountain. And at the base, there are many distinctions. There are differences in the prayers, in the stories, in the holidays. Just as one mountain may start in the tundra, and to climb it you'd wear a snowsuit and crampons and have an ice axe, while another mountain might start in the desert and you'd be wearing flip-flops and a t-shirt. Fundamentalism is when we say, this is the only true mountain. I don't know what you're doing over there climbing that thing, but this is a mountain. But of course, while there are differences at the base, when we get up to the top, the mystics say less and less about pretty much the same thing. For at the top of all mountains, you have great altitude and view and very little air. And interestingly, the one thing that you can't see is your own mountain. A teaching about how the path is different than the culmination. So in my mind, all those mystics are not talking about the same thing. But still, we lowly mortals can bicker about the differences between the different faith traditions. We can also see the unity. We can also see the oneness. And I see that, as this is my second time here, it's a great blessing to be here, as one of the great gifts of this faith community, of your ability to see the commonality. For the Jewish community, we come together this evening as at the beginning of the high holiday Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. It starts this evening and it runs for 2 days. Most people stop after the first day. We gather together in community, and in Judaism, we say that faith is sort of like a tree. There's the trunk, which is about our connection to ourself. There are the branches, which is our connections to the divine, to God, to whatever we call the nameless force. Personally, I think the great Rabbi George Lucas got it right when he called it the force. It's transcendent, it's bigger than all of us, it's immanent, it connects us all. We can tap into it or we can ignore it, but it's there all the same. You can use it for good, you can use it for evil. And then there are the roots. Ah, yes. And then there's the blower. And then there are the roots, which is community. And interestingly, for most trees, the branches will only grow out as far as the roots go, so the tree doesn't tip over. So too, how deeply and expansively you want to connect with God, so too we need to tap into our community. For a whole month leading up to Rosh Hashanah, every morning, we blow the shofar, the ram's horn. Can you imagine this was once on a ram? And it was cut off and cleaned. And they blow it every morning as a call to wake to the new year. A call for the community to come together as community. I'm going to give it one long blast as best I can. And then there'll be others who will blow it over Rosh Hashanah. You're supposed to hear it 100 times over the course of the holiday. This won't sound nearly as good as Robert singing, I promise. It echoes back to a time of ancient time. Thank you, thank you. No. And it reminds us to come together in our different sacred communities. And I ask you, what is your sacred community that you belong to? The most obvious may be this faith community here. But even before you came here, there's the sacred community of your family of origin, your family of your own making. And this, in some ways, is the most essential faith community because all faith communities are both a blessing and a curse. And isn't that what family's about? The traumas that make us who we are and make us better people for it. We have 3 children now, as of just about a month ago. We have a 6.5-year-old Lila. We have a little almost 2-year-old Abraham, and then we're in the process of adopting a little girl, Kylie, that just joined us, who's 3. It has been a tumultuous month, to say the least, to have one more person join our family. I think 3 is the new 6 in terms of family. Lila recently did a project on community at her first grade class, and she came home and showed me the picture she had drawn with a house in the middle, and it said Lila underneath it. Lila is Hebrew for night of the Bible. It was evening and it was morning the first day, it was night, it was day. And then coming out from that house, there was a path that led to the church where my wife is the pastor. Another path leading to the synagogue where we're all members and I teach. There were pathways leading to the names of friends of hers and social communities. And we all have all of these different extensions of ourselves. Ways of belonging to community and family. Ways of belonging to community amongst friends. Ways of belonging to community in a faith community. I'm reminded of a time, about 3 or 4 months ago when Abraham, the 1.5-year-old at the time, was really getting on Lila's nerves and was being very irritating. And she came stomping in and she said, "I can't stand this." And my wife Liz said, "So how do you feel about Abraham right now? On a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel about Abraham?" She said, "He's being so annoying, he's a 9. And I thought, that's a lot of love in your heart. To just knock it down 1. So how do we gather together as a faith community? We come together, as it says in the Christian scripture, "For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there I am in the midst of them." Or in the Hebrew Bible, it says, God says, "Build me a dwelling place, a sanctuary, and I will dwell amongst them." It doesn't say I'll dwell in there, because it's not about the place. Yes, this is your beautiful sanctuary, but it becomes a sanctuary when you arrive here. And when we act in godly ways, then God dwells amongst us, that indwelling presence. In Judaism, the transcendent God is the masculine, the indwelling presence is the feminine. And the feminine, we know, is there and then is gone. Is there when we are acting in godly ways, but when we are acting in unholy ways, how can God be found? All we have to do is open our eyes and return to this moment once again. And again, we find community and we find holiness. It's amazing the connection that can be built just from singing together and praying together and affirming together, even people that you haven't talked to ever before, but you already feel a kinship to them. In my meditation life, I remember doing long meditation retreats, sometimes 10 days, sometimes 4 months. And over that time, people that I'd be sitting with, I never spoke to. And yet there'd be ones I'd fall in love with and others that I just know were just horrible people from the way that they ate and the way that they walked and the way that they meditated, right? The projections that we create. Over here's someone that I have projected what our grandchildren are going to look at. It doesn't matter that I was already married and this and that. You know, I've got a romance going on over here with this person, and I can imagine our vacations, our kids, our grandkids, and over here, this person walks like an elephant, eats like a pig. I don't know why they invited this person on the retreat. But then you talk to them on the last day, you find you've got nothing in common with this person, and this person's actually quite interesting. It's a real teaching in how we're constantly projecting what we think of other people based on very little bits of information. And yet we can also find that we have connection. I lead a meditation group in Davis, an interfaith group, each Tuesday evening. And I talk a lot because I give a teaching each week, but the community really doesn't speak very much. Some Q&A, some discussion, but the people there really feel bonded just from doing deep spiritual practice together. It's a way of opening our hearts even in the silence. We have other communities. We have social communities. We also, of course, have the entire human community. Those times when we step into some new environment and there's suddenly a change of view and we feel this deep connection to all of humanity. I remember when I was traveling in India doing spiritual practice, the first time I got on an Indian train at midnight in Delhi, and I stepped on rows and rows, 3 rows high of people lying on bench beds. It was hot, it was summer, mostly men wearing just longies, loincloths, and stretched out. The first thing that came into my mind was it reminded me of pictures of cattle cars from the Holocaust. But then as we rode along through the Indian night, and I connected to people, we tried to talk a little, and just seeing all of humanity, there was some universality that came out of that experience. We're all on this train together. We live together, we die together. Then in another way, we live alone and we die alone. There's an existential loneliness that pervades this experience. And yet we come together to hold that loneliness. Even beyond the human community, we can find sacred community in the natural world. For many people, their deepest spiritual experience is in nature, climbing a mountain, by a riverside, watching a sunset. And we have to remember as humans that we are not the rulers over the universe, but we are just one element of it, along with the rocks and the trees and the coyote and the deer. It was just last week, a week and a half ago, that Greta Thunberg, the Swedish teenager, gave that powerful speech to the UN on climate change. She reminded us that we are all part of the universal family. And she gave a call to us as elders that we have to take care of this community, this sacred universal community. She said, "You say you hear us and that you understand the urgency. But no matter how sad or how angry I am, I do not believe that. Because if you really understood the situation and still kept on failing to act, that would be evil. And I refuse to believe that." What a testament to faith and hope and possibility that people can still wake up. It's not too late to wake up. I speak of hope and I'm reminded of my Native American elder and teacher, Fred Wapapa, from the Bay Area, who I used to sit many sweat lodges and vision quests with. And I remember him once telling me, he said, "Seth, in our language, we have no word for hope." He said, "We have no word for hope because we know things are just as they're supposed to be right now." Well, that's a pretty remarkable statement, considering that 99% of the Native American community was decimated by the most effective genocide in human history. To say the world is just as it's supposed to be right now. So thus we need no word for hope. The power of community, the power of our teachers and our elders The power even of the ones we haven't met, we don't know. The benefactors that some of you may have called into the room when we called on beings of light. Mahatma Gandhi, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. When I was a monk in Burma for some months, and I was having a really hard time with my meditation, and I was in a deep depression, my teacher took me outside and he pointed to the far-off mountains and he said, "You see those mountains? There are monks and nuns sitting in those hills, in caves, doing metta, loving-kindness meditation. They're sending loving-kindness," and he stuck his finger in my chest, "to you." And he said, "Worst of all, you deserve it." Of all the people I met in my travels and teachers and students, those nameless, faceless people that were sending me loving kindness in some ways are the ones that I remember the most. It takes a community of people we know, but it also takes a community of the ones we don't know, the beings of light, the beings of memory. Thich Nhat Hanh, who was already mentioned this morning, the great Zen master and poet, nominated by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King for a Nobel Peace Prize. He says that the next Buddha, the next great enlightened being who will lead the world, is not going to be an individual, is going to be a community. The next Buddha will be a Sangha, will be a community of people, a spiritual community, which means it's you, and you, and you. Community is a great tool for change. As Greta said in her speech to the UN, we will not let you get away with this. Right here, right now is where we draw the line. The world is waking up, and change is coming, whether you like it or not. Wow. And there's also a fundamental truth in there. Change is always coming. What in this world doesn't change? Right? Find me something that isn't changing. Of course, in the Jewish community, there can be some resistance to change. As our singer friend will tell you, Robert, when you're singing in a Jewish community and you're leading the congregation and you change one of the tunes to one of the prayers or one of the psalms, nobody sings along. That's not how we do it here. And then you do it again the next week, on the next Sabbath, the next Friday night or Saturday, and maybe a few people sing along. By the third week, everybody's singing. By the fourth week, if you go back to the old way, we've always done it that other way. What are you doing changing the tune? It's hard to accept change. But change is what it's all about. And helping others to work through periods of change is such an important part of giving back to the community. As was already mentioned, I run the Exodus Project, a mentoring program for people coming out of jail in Sacramento. We do one-on-one and group mentoring to be a spiritual friend, a support, a guide, a sponsor of sorts. One-on-one, women with women and men with men, to support people during the last 2 months of their incarceration and 6 months after their release, to walk with them on their journey, perhaps bring them along with you to church. Because changing your life is a hard thing, but it's something we constantly have to be doing. As the great writer Gabriel Garcia Marquez wrote, human beings aren't born just once when their mother gave birth to them. Life obliges us to be born again and again, to give birth to ourselves over and over. So I've looked around this room and I've seen 3 people that I think would make great mentors for the Exodus Project. One of them speaking up right over there. A little young, we'll wait for a later mentor training for that one. But I hope you will take a flyer on your way out and consider becoming a mentor in somebody's life. As it's another way of building community, of being part of the sacred community. I was going to say something about I'll come and find you after one of the three of you. And I was reminded of this old Jewish joke about the Jew, the Muslim, and the Christian who are lost on a desert island. And each of them is praying, and the Christian prays to Jesus, and after his prayers, says a prayer for salvation and being saved and found. And the Muslim prays to Allah, and then also prays a prayer for being saved from the island. And the Jew prays to God, and then stops. The other two say, aren't you going to pray for us to be saved? The Jew says, I'm not so worried about that. You see, I have to admit I did quite well in business in my earlier life, and we just moved to a new community. And I joined the synagogue a couple of years ago with my family, and the first year we pledged $10,000 to the synagogue. Last year they came back to me, and I pledged $100,000. Pledges, Rosh Hashanah is coming, and pledges are due tomorrow. They're going to find me. So I'm going to find you if you're going to be a good mentor. There are too many things in this world, in our community, in our own lives, in need of earnest, sincere effort. There is no time to waste. There's no time to sit by and wait for someone else to do it. I remember the first time I went into a prison, I met a woman named Julie who was smoking a cigarette outside. And I was walking in, and she stopped me outside the classroom door, and we started chatting, and she said, you know, the more time you have in here, the less time you have to waste. I thought, that's an interesting twist on it. She said, I'm doing life, so I've got no time to waste. We're all doing life. We all have life sentences. Anyone here planning not to die? The question is, are we doing life, or is life doing us? Are we living to our fullest potential? And part of that is giving back to your community. So what keeps us? What keeps us from showing up deeply in a community? What keeps us closed off, disconnected, afraid? Me, the self, me, my problems, my life, my marriage, my divorce, my neuroses, my kids, my car, my future, my past, my problems, right? All the things that we spend most of the time fixated on. I was in Marin, California, which was the perfect place to see this bumper sticker. Best bumper sticker I ever saw. It said, I may not be much, but I'm all I think about. It's true. And the high holidays for Jews are a time to come together and think about more than just yourself. About being a spiritual friend. About God dwelling amongst us. About being part of a community. So I'll finish with one story. After meeting that woman in the prison and started going there on a regular basis teaching, I went back in the spring that year and led a Passover Seder. And we talked about Exodus, we told the Exodus story, we talked about release from imprisonment and oppression and freedom, which is a powerful thing to be talking about in prison, with some 30 women, some of them in for life without parole. And then we sat down for the Seder meal, and we had chicken, and we had matzo ball soup, and we had salad, and we had potatoes, and all the ritual foods. And we had our plates, the ones with the divisions for the potatoes over here and the peas over here, and our little sporks, half spoon, half fork. And we sat down. I had a woman on one side that was my age, a woman next to me who could have been my grandmother, on the other side. And they started eating. And one of the women started gobbling down the food at an unbelievably fast pace. And I did my best not to stare at her because I didn't want to embarrass her. But she was really wolfing down the food. And eventually she stopped for a moment, took a breath, and said, Rabbi, how long do we have? And I looked at my watch and I said, we've got half an hour. We've got no time to waste. We've got all the time we need. She said, all the time we need? Half an hour? They give us 10 minutes a meal. And the woman next to her said, they're supposed to give us 10 minutes a meal. They don't usually give us that. She said, 10 minutes a meal, 3 meals a day, 33 years in here. How long is that? I don't know how to eat slowly. And she took another bite. She chewed it. She went for another bite, but by the third bite, she was gulping her food down again, wolfing it. And the woman next to her reached out and took her hand, grabbed her wrist. And everybody stared because there was a strict rule of no physical contact. And the woman reached out and took the spork out of her hand, looked at her and said, "Chew." The woman chewed and swallowed. The other woman handed her the spork back. She took another bite. The woman took the spork away again. For the next 10 or 15 minutes, that spork just went back and forth between those two hands. There's an old saying in Judaism that it was easier to get the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt than it was to get slavery in Egypt out of the Israelites. But we can do it together as a community. And it begins with that affirmation about forgiveness. Living in community means forgiving ourselves and each other. With forgiveness, we can ascend to a higher place on whatever spiritual mountain we are climbing. We can reach a mystical height. What holds us down and weighs us down to the bottom is the things we can't let go of. What is forgiveness but giving up all hope of a better past? Moving on, letting go. May we take time to reflect with honesty on our words, our actions, and even our intentions. May we forgive ourselves and each other. In the words of W.B. Auden, may we love our crooked neighbor with all our crooked heart.